So we were all inside the house, and we started calling the ICRC, the ambulances, anybody to come and rescue us. But nobody came. And then we heard an ambulance, and then nothing. Silence. But later we saw that the Israeli soldiers asked the ambulance drivers to come out of the car, to undress, and they bulldozed the ambulance with the tank.
Samiyat wa Rashid al-Sheikh, an ambulance driver who had his ambulance parked next to his house, decided to come to his neighbor's help when he heard them shout. He put on his ambulance crew clothes and asked his son to put on a fluorescent jacket. They had driven a few meters from the house to the immediate vicinity of the Abid Rabbo house when Israeli soldiers near the house ordered them to halt and get out of the vehicle. Samiyat al-Sheikh protested that he had heard cries for help from the family and intended to bring the wounded to hospital. The soldiers ordered him and his son to undress and then redress. They then ordered them to abandon the ambulance and to walk towards Jabaliyah, which they complied with. When the families returned to Isbat, Abid Rabbo, on the 18th of January, they found the ambulance was in the same place, but had been crushed.
I call upon the international community and ask why my children were cold-bloodedly killed. Why were they fired on? My mother, 60, she was hit in her chest. My daughter, Suad, 8 years, in her chest. Samar, 4 years, in the chest. Amal, 3 years, in the chest. And this is despite the fact that they are all different sizes. All the targeting was at the chest. This was execution. This was utter execution, and I'm asking the world, what crime did my children commit? What danger did they pose for the Israeli army? I myself was there. Why didn't they fire at me? Why didn't they kill me and not let me see my children die in front of my eyes? My children. Until now, I cannot get myself to realize there I was looking at them while they were dying.
When Khalid Abid Rabbo returned to his home on the 18th of January 2009, his house, as most houses in that part of Isbat Abid Rabbo, had been demolished. He drew the mission's attention to an anti-tank mine under the rubble of a neighbor's house. The mission notes that, in general, Isbat Abid Rabbo and nearby areas appear to have been among the locations in Gaza which saw the most intense combat during the military operations. The testimony of Khalid Abid Rabbo, however, shows that the Israeli armed forces were not engaged in combat or fearing an attack at the time of the incident. 2 soldiers were sitting on the tank in front of the Abid Rabbo family house, having a snack. They clearly did not perceive any danger from the house, its occupants, or the surroundings. Moreover, when the family, consisting of a man, a young, and an elderly woman, and 3 small girls, waving white flags, stepped out of the house, they stood still for several minutes waiting for instructions from the soldiers. The Israeli soldiers could, therefore, not reasonably have perceived any threat from the group. Indeed, the fact that the gunfire was directed at the 3 girls, and subsequently at the elderly woman, and not at the young adult couple, can be seen as further corroborating the finding that there was no reasonable ground for the soldier shooting to assume that any of the members of the group were directly participating in the hostilities. The mission finds that the soldier deliberately directed lethal fire at Suad, Samar, and Amal Abid Rabbo, and at their grandmother, Hajia Suad Abid Rabbo.
The mission found that in this and other incidents, that the Israeli armed forces repeatedly opened fire on civilians who were not taking part in the hostilities and who posed no threat to them. The mission further finds that by preventing Samir al-Sheikh from taking the wounded to the nearest hospital in his ambulance, the Israeli armed forces deliberately further aggravated the consequences of the shooting. After the soldiers had forced Samir al-Sheikh and his son to get out of the ambulance, undress, and then redress, they knew that they did not constitute a threat. Nonetheless, the soldiers forced Samir al-Sheikh and his son to abandon the ambulance and to walk towards Jabalia. The fundamental principles applicable to these incidents, which are cornerstones of both treaty-based and customary international humanitarian law, are that quoting, that the parties to the conflict shall at all times distinguish between the civilian population and combatants, and that the civilian population as such, as well as individual civilians, shall not be the object of attack. The mission found that in none of the cases reviewed were there any grounds which could have reasonably induced the Israeli armed forces to assume that the civilians attacked were in fact taking a direct part in the hostilities and had thus lost their immunity against direct attacks. The mission therefore finds that the Israeli armed forces have violated the prohibition under customary international law. The State of Israel should be responsible under international law for these wrongful actions carried out by its agents. The mission finds that the conduct of the Israeli armed forces in these cases would constitute grave breaches of the Fourth Geneva Convention in respect of willful killings and willfully causing great suffering to protected persons, and as such give rise to individual criminal responsibility. On this basis, the mission finds a violation of the obligation under customary international law to treat the wounded humanely.